What's happening, family? It's your man Dame DNYDC, host of the Two Mics Up podcast. And today is the day. Season 2, episode 31, first episode of the season is finally here. And we're back today with some really amazing guests. Um, Two gentlemen that I hold in the highest regard. Uh, John was probably the first person outside of our Friday night groups, that I had the pleasure and the privilege of sitting down and talking to a little more than a year ago. And he has been a huge friend, and not only personally, but to the show. They are partners. We try to do as much as we can to support one another. And I'm just excited, man. Look, moving into this new year with these guys, man, these heavy hitters coming on and really supporting us, man. I'm really at a loss for words. So before we really get into the things, I'm going to just be quiet and I'm going to ask John Reid, who is the founder and editor of the Prince William Perspective, and we have Langston Carter, another fine young man, another king in our community, who is the managing editor of the Prince William Perspective. I'm going to sit back and, gentlemen, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for everyone who's listening today. Yes, my name is John Reid, the editor of the PW Perspective, and we have been in establishment since 2019. And it is a pleasure to have, thank you so much for having myself and here are my managing editor, Langston Carter, here today to come together and talk about these issues. And one of the things about myself, we've been working in journalism for over 27 years. I've been covering sports here on a local level. This is my alma mater, Woodbridge High School at Northern Virginia Community College, and then also covering political and science issues at Virginia Commonwealth University. Later on, worked for the former Potomac News, and also being able to work in a variety of different media outlets. In addition to that, also work as a podcast producer on the show The Dose, which is a weekly show based on health and wellness issues within the Black community. And recently just finished a first documentary, which is called A Wild Ride Called Life, which talks about the veterans with PTSD and how they're overcoming it. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for having me. My name is Langston Carter. I am a student at American University, a local activist, a writer, and I used to work Democratic campaigns. I no longer do campaign staffing, but I have a lot of experience in that area. I'm majoring in public relations and minoring in legal studies at AU.
Man, impressive resumes from both of our guests. And, it's very interesting that Langston, you brought up, coordinating and orchestrating, candidacies and working in politics. I'm really curious, really from both of you gentlemen, being journalists, with everything that's taking place with this, I'm just going insurrection that took place on the 6th. What is your views on what took place, and what's really going on in our country today?
Well, the way I look at it is this, and thank you for asking that question, Damon, is yes, it was an insurrection by domestic terrorists. Let's call it for what it is. And one thing, and I have to look at it from two different points of view. First, I have to look at it as a citizen myself, which of course it was abhorrent. And it was just it was the utter, where we want to talk about it being an inside job or not, that's a topic for another day. But the fact of the matter is that this was something that was orchestrated and encouraged by a sitting president of the United States, and that it put not only the Speaker of the House, but the Vice President, it put so many lives in danger. And the fact that this was orchestrated in a manner in which it was absolutely ugly. It was a black mark on this country. And we know we've seen several black marks on this country. This is sadly just the latest. And to see the way it happened, watching that playing on live television, it was very discouraging. But at the same time, as a journalist, and I'm watching, I'm always studying what different outlets, where depending on, regardless of what aisle that you sit on, what was very disturbing to see is how people were labeling it, labeling it as, oh, patriots and defenders of freedom. And I'm sitting here like, okay, you got to be kidding me. Let's have a little journalism 101 class here, people. And the fact is that when people who were putting these viewpoints out there versus other mainstream media outlets, of course, they're looking for different angles, of course, and that's the way the journalism business is. You're always looking for what's the angle that's going to hit home the hardest. But the fact is that there were not a lot of stories that are being told about why this was being done until all the smoke cleared and people were going home. And I thought that this was an opportunity to really open up some eyes to just how ugly this presidency has been the last 4 years. And so regardless of the reasons why it was done, the fact that matters, it was done and it was allowed. And so I believe there has to be, we'll talk about this later on about journalistic integrity and how we report these issues. But yes, it was, one of the worst attack on the U.S. Capitol since World War II. And so when we see these things happening, and especially looking from the outside in, it just opens up a mirror. It's almost like saying, I think about, it took a mirror to America. And I think about Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Marvin Gaye took that mirror to America and said, hey, take a look at yourselves, America. This is what you invent. This is what you allowed to happen. All right. Are you going to take responsibility for it? And so my question is, are we going to, as a country, going to take responsibility for these actions? And like you said in the introduction, do we hold people accountable? And those being held accountable, will they be held punishable for the acts they committed?
And I completely agree with everything John just said. I would just add that it was utterly horrifying to watch TV that day and see everything happening, watching as insurrectionists broke in to the United States Capitol, putting the lives of hundreds of our country's leaders at risk. And what's also disturbing is the fact that a lot of media outlets are not calling them what they are, domestic terrorists. Mm-hmm. They're still using the term protester, which they were not. They called Black Lives Matter protesters this summer rioters. But when white people break into the nation's capital and threaten our lawmakers, they're protesters.
I mean, you said it so eloquently, and I'm going to let Lisa jump in, because I know I see it, and she and I have talked about this, but John, you hit it on the head, because I've said to Lisa behind and my wife and everybody that knows me, all that was a reflection of America. They really looked at themselves in the mirror, and that really showed me why there are two Americas. They were comfortable looking at themselves. This is what they've been ingrained with, and this is how they interact, and this is really who they are. And to piggyback on what Langston said, during the summer, and even to this day, anything with people of color, they label it automatically Black Lives Matter, whatever, but they're thugs. We're terrorists. We're a terrorist group now. So it's just bananas. And the way that they've tried to de-escalate the wording, it's like they're spiraling down, but when it's us, they spiral and ramp up. So it's just really disgusting. And I just had to say that before, because I know Lisa, go ahead. I see the double Dutch. Come on, let's go. I see you.
Listen, I agree with both of our guests on this, but what John said, that while I was sitting here listening, that struck me is, from a journalistic standpoint and from the media standpoint, we have a young lady, unfortunately, who lost her life, but it's almost like a hero send-off in the media, because she was an airman and she was, served our country and was a veteran, but we almost see the polar opposite when it comes to us. We don't get that he was a father or, a loved one, or whatever the person's job was, he or she job was. We always get the criminal history, when it comes to us, we get the negative connotation. So it's almost, when John just said that, it was just like, wow, yeah, from a journalistic standpoint, we don't stand highly in the media. But now I see, over these last few days since the incident happened, is that we're being compared. because of the force. So I see a lot of people saying, oh, if this was a Black Lives Matter rally, you know, on mainstream media, as almost as if it's a talking point, right? So, oh yeah, if it was Black Lives Matter, we would see the, you know, riot gear, the amount of force, the rubber bullets and the tear gas. But shouldn't it be a little deeper than just saying that? Should we not be going inside and doing that accountability and holding it? Because we've been saying this for so many years that there's two Americas and we get treated this way and we get treated that way. But by the same media, you're also enablers as well. So now that it's a talking point to say, you know, oh, if it was Black Lives Matter, but you report that way. So it's almost like a hypocrisy. So I just, you know, it's just amazing.
Yeah, can I real quick piggyback on that, Damon? And I'll just say this. The Southern strategy that Lee Atwater brought in the early 1980s is still prevalent today in the media, okay? And for those who know Southern strategy, I definitely encourage you to Google that. It's still in effect, because we know when it's used certain terms, we know they're talking about Black people, we know they're talking about brown people, we know they're talking about marginalized folks. So it's always there in effect. And so that's one of the things Langston and I, you know, we make sure in the PW perspective to just highlight and empower our people, because the terms that they use on mainstream media, and shout out to the independent journalists who report the way it is, that we have a responsibility to be that voice of reason, a voice of truth, to uplift our people, because we know what the game's about, you know, and it's our own corporate interest. And it's also done with it to lessen our effect. Like you said, you want to say her name, but you won't say Sandra Bland's name. You know, you want to say Breonna Taylor's name. You know, you want to keep those names silenced. And it's like, no more. We're not going to do that anymore.
Look,
right. I agree.
I
agree fully.
I refuse to give her, again, tragedy is one thing, but you can't compare when you willfully knowing that you were going to an event with the intent to cross and enter into areas that no American citizen is supposed to be. And I don't know, again, and I don't know if this is white privilege, but you know, somebody's pointing a gun at you, telling you that you don't belong here, and you're going to continue to try to ram through a secure door. I don't know what else you think is going to happen when you see a gun, you know, pointing through that door. And again, I don't condone violence or anything like that, but I refuse to give fuel to that movement that they're trying, or the narrative that they're trying to push, you know. And I don't want to sound cold or anything like that, but I'm just at a point where when it's us, they don't care, and I'm just at the point right now, I don't care. I'm not going to give that any more life or any more air.
Yeah. Not going to speak power into the Say Her Name. We originated the Say Her Name for women who otherwise would have been invisible to mainstream media. So when we say Her Name, we're uplifting women who have been unjustifiably killed by police officers. So unjustifiably wrong, because there is a such thing as a justified shooting and an unjustified shooting. If you're in the commencement, if you are in the middle of committing a crime and you are in the middle of a terrorist situation or a riot situation, then justifiability is up to the law. We're saying, when we say Her Name, is where someone is sleeping in their bed. You know, someone is playing a video game with their nephew. Someone is driving their car. They're not in the commencement of committing any crimes, but they are no longer here with us unjustifiably, and we don't get justice. So we will not allow you to hijack our plight as you've done, you know, with the rest of our culture. So that is one thing. I won't breathe life into their Say Her Name, but we won't allow you to do that. You will not be able, as a Black woman, I will always speak up and disavow that portion of Say Her Name. I will never, you won't do that. I won't allow that, because your fighting is not the same. Your cause is not the same. Our fights are different. You're upset because of an election. We're talking about lives, injustice, inequality. We're talking about our everyday living. So I just can't, breathe life into that.
We're not going to do it. But, talking about that from the Prince William perspective, your perspective, what role does journalism actually play in our society? And more importantly, in your opinion, in our culture? And I'll pass that one to Langston if Langston wants to jump in on that first.
Well, I would say that for a long time, journalists and newspapers have turned their backs on not only the Black community, but other communities of color, and written race-baiting headlines and articles, and really sought only to harm people of color, and specifically the Black community. And what we're trying to do with the PW Perspective is undo some of that damage by bringing a voice to the Black community and other communities of color in Prince William County and surrounding areas. We have a really strong minority community here, and they've never been listened to, not by elected officials, not by the government, and not by newspapers. As Black journalists, as anti-racist journalists, John and I are working to create a medium of news that's new here in Virginia. And the fact that we've been so well received in the community shows how necessary this kind of writing was.
So, John, before you answer though, Langston, so anti-racist news.
Yes.
Could you just take a moment and just kind of expound on that?
Of course. I hate to say it, but racism has kind of taken over the news industry in a lot of ways. Race baiting and controversial headlines have become a strategy of the mainstream white media, and the digital age has only amplified those issues that have always been present. Journalism has become more about getting as many clicks as possible. And in order to do that, a lot of these organizations are going to echo some of the hateful sentiments that people like President Donald Trump have, where he talks about how horrible inner cities are and how horrible urban areas are and how awful immigrants are. And what really happens is white mainstream media organizations pick those up and run them as headlines because news has become about getting the most clicks. But being an anti-racist news organization, we don't do that. We work to undo the damage that those tactics do. And at the PW Perspective, we refuse to implement those tactics.
Now I get it loud and clear. John, same question for you. From your perspective, what role does journalism play in our society, and more importantly, in the Black community?
Oh, it plays an extraordinary responsibility, Damon. And as Langston said, the thing with people, when you talk about anti-racist, because there's a lot of publications, and again, shout out to those that are pro-Black. We need those, but it's also need those that are anti-racist, because we are Virginia's only anti-racist publication. And we say that because we call it out evil for what it is. And you have to do that in society. It's one thing to say, okay, it's like, for instance, in the Black community, the way I remember, and there was an interview with Bernard Shaw, late Bernard Shaw, CNN, who was one of my idols in journalism. And he talked about, in the Black community, it's like a scalded dog, a dog who's been beaten for decades by his master, been starved and put out in the cold for years. Now he goes into a new master. Now there's a Black master that's trying to take care of it. And while that dog is still receiving that, for the first time, there are people who are actually trying to help me, I still got to call that master who beat it for so long. I still got to call that person out who abused it for years. And as Langston said, it's still going on today. You don't have to go very far. We can go as far as the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can go right here in Prince William County, all right, to see those people who are continuing to try to oppress Black and brown people with their laws. I remember the Kansas City Star recently came out with an apology for the fact they were, as they said, strategically trying to diminish Black people in their community. And if you've ever been to Kansas City, you know how many Black people there are, okay?
Right.
Oh, it's no surprise when we see a white-owned publication, and we know, like I said, we all know it's corporate interest. I mean, this has been the case since 1987 when the fairness doctrine policy got removed and it stopped being about fairness and oneness and started being about, hey, what can I do to get corporate dollars, where news now became a business. Well, what's the way to get business? Hey, let me uplift this community over here, but this minority community, let me put them down. And so that's what we at the PW Perspective, our goal is to reach out, become a voice for the silenced minority, because what has happened is that the mainstream media has tried to silence our people for so long that we said no more, that we were not going to stand for that. And so we have a responsibility in the Black community similar to Ida B. Wells. You know, for those who may not know Ida B. Wells and the great migration she led out of Memphis, you know, in the 1800s, was to tell people, Black people, hey, we can do better. We don't have to be stuck in these situations anymore. Let us, number one, they're never going to give us a fair shake. So let's do what we've got to do. And so we as journalists, as Black journalists, have a responsibility to tell our communities, hey, we there's a way to do better, but also let's not forget about those who tried to hold us down, and we're going to hold their feet to the fire. You can't come out and say you're pro-progressive and pro-black, and then you're, you know, it's like James Baldwin said, I know I don't believe what you're saying because I believe your actions. And so we see the actions of those who are continuing to try to do that. And that is our responsibility as Black journalists, is to not only uplift, but to call out for what it is.
And that's so rare. That's so rare, John. We don't get that. We don't see that. Even in the so-called some Black publications, there's no more holding people accountable, no more holding people to task, no more even counter speaking up to the you know, the microaggressions that we do see in the mainstream media. Even what we supposed to have as our publications are not even calling that out. You know, what you guys are doing in Prince William Perspective is exactly what Black America needs. We need to go back to the basics, the fundamentals of encouraging and being there for each other and guiding. Because as a journalist, I'm sure you know and see more than the average working Joe. So to report honestly to the people, especially people of color, should be some kind of creed. It should be what you took an oath to do as a journalist. But we're not seeing that outside of the Prince William Perspective. Other than you guys, we don't see that.
Say that again. Say it again for the people in the back who can't hear you, because that's the truth right there. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Real quick, who remembers growing up watching BET when they used to have shows like Teen Summit and some of the other shows, and Ed Gordon and the news, right? And I know I'm myself here, so but when it came out, it was a source in the Black. We always watched, you know, Ed Gordon giving the news. We'll watch Teen Summit where it was uplifting, you know, for the pro-Black, you know, Africana and what have you. You know, we were watching it with HBCU shirts on, and we were like, wow, this is awesome. This really speaks to me as a young Black man. I was growing up in Georgia at the time, and then they took it away because of corporate interest. But the reason behind it is another story. But the fact is that when that happened, it was almost like a void took place. It was a void that we really needed to have filled, and it wasn't being told. And often, what you do, you'd have Black journalists by mainstream media where they will be, okay, we'll go cover this old Black story over here, cover this. We're not going to give much credence to it, but do your job over here. And when Langston and I, we came together and formed the PW Perspective, it was for the purpose of, no, we're not only going to give a voice, but it's going to also be with the responsibility of seeing how we can uplift, but also challenge the status quo. Like you said, you know, as reporters, we get access to things we never seen before, but it's also saying, hey, you know, we need to not only do this, but we need to make change, real change in the Black and Brown community. Like,
how did you come together and formulate the Prince William? Like, where'd that creation come from?
Well, and let's talk about political campaigns background, which Langston is very experienced in. He'll speak of that in a moment. And actually started, this was not just so much that happened over a couple of years ago. This was something that's been in the making. And I remember first time I had an opportunity to do something like this in Richmond, and working on a Black-owned publication at BCU. And over time, I started to work with more Black politicians and helping them with their stories and running PR campaigns. And I remember there was a time I was working with one politician who was running, Black politician was running a couple of years ago. And we were having a conversation. Matter of fact, we were having a conversation it was over by the Dell City Giant. And one thing he said to me in that parking lot, and I'll never forget it. He said, "Oh, one of the things that was discouraging to him in his race was that he would talk to his publications about, hey, could you give us, some time for us to interview to talk about our platform?" And one of the media outlets actually told him and said, "No, we're not a sounding board for you and your people." And when he said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And instantly, right then, I went home, and I remember I was telling my wife, I said, "Honey, all right, I'm going to go full bore with this." And I talked to a good friend of mine, Tony Ayers, who runs the Virginia connection down in Richmond, and we and I started talking. I said, "Okay, all right, I'm going to put this together." And it took some laborers' hours and working on it, but I said with the purpose of being, a voice for the silenced minority. And I remember and actually the gentleman I was to refer me to Langston. And so I remember the first time Langston and I had that conversation, and I was like, okay, I'm hoping he'll get along with this, because I saw his resume and the things he had done, and it was like, it just clicked. You just know, it's like, you talk about basketball earlier, it's like Michael and Scotty, you just know, all right, this is going to work, and all I just Langston came with, I was like, boom, that's it. And when he came with the term, we formulated anti-racist, and then it went from there.
Guys, can you take us behind the scenes to like your daily operation? How do you get your stories? Like what does it look like behind the scenes at the Prince William Perspective?
Well, I think we have a great team. We've got me, John, Alex, Lolita, and Anissa, and the five of us work closely together to track down stories, decide who's the best fit to write them, and get them out really as soon as we can. Sometimes we will see something locally that we think needs to be covered. We'll get press releases. We'll have people reach out to cover a story, and we really just try to assign someone to it as quickly as we can. But we don't rush through the writing process as a lot of other publications do. I know we have some publications locally that have been known to use some of the race baiting tactics I've talked about earlier. And we have some publications locally that have rushed stories out so quickly they completely get the facts wrong. And I'm not talking they get the facts of what happened wrong. I'm talking they mislabel one of our supervisors' political parties.
Whoa.
We've seen that happen.
That's Russian then.
Yeah, we work to make sure we're not only getting a story out in due time, but also making sure it's a quality story.
Yeah,
and the facts are straight.
Exactly.
And I want to take back to a moment. Langston just brought it up about a time where that took place. It was back in the middle of July, and this is when all the Black Lives Matter protests was taking place, and there was an incident that happened at the McCourt building during a Board of County Supervisors discussion, and there was an altercation. There was a situation that occurred, and what happened was that instantly, and when we look at these publications and how the Black and brown people who were involved, the ones who were actually attacked, were being portrayed in the media as the agitators. And so we got together, our team, and it was like, hey, no, we're going to go to them. And one of the things that we do to PW Perspective is we put our boots on the ground. We will go there to the people and talk with them and hear it from their point of view. And so when we got a chance to talk about that and be able to highlight that, hey, no, this is what really happened. And it's not like we have to say, here's the true story. We just present, like you said, Lisa, here are the facts. Here are the facts. And so when we presented those facts, it was as if it was almost like a great migration of itself, because then in the Black and brown community, people who were feeling that, the other media outlets who were unfairly targeting these young people, and they start saying, well, finally somebody is truly speaking up for us, so we can paint these stories, and present them in a manner. I always look at journalism kind of like a meal, 3 parts of a meal, like your grain, your meat, and your vegetables. You got to have your fairness, you got to have your objectivity, you got to have your honesty. And one of the things, and Langston said it so well, is one thing that we stand at PW Perspective most and foremost is our honesty. It's like the old saying, when Lyndon B. Johnson said about Walter Cronkite, he said, if I lose Cronkite, I lose the nation, and because Cronkite was that voice. And so one of the things we make is adhere to an ingredients on our plate is definitely about honesty. And we make sure that it's done factually. And like I said, we don't rush things. We don't rush the process. It's not about being first. This is anything for future aspiring journalists. It is not about being first. It's about being right. And every article, and I challenge anyone to go back in our articles since we were invented in November 2019, to go back. And each and every one of it is factually correct. We have never put in a retraction. We've never had to apologize for anything because we stand on our principles of being anti-racist, pro-justice. And so that is just it's the machine, it's the culture that we have, that for people who come in, they understand, okay, we're not here for clickbait. We're not here we don't cater to a certain advertisers, certain government officials. It is about empowering and uplifting our community.
That being said, we have had to take down stories sometimes when the facts don't line up.
Absolutely.
There have been a couple times where we've had some contradicting sources where we've had to remove a story.
But I think that's to be expected, though, at certain points.
Absolutely.
There is a human aspect to this. And unfortunately, some people have other motives or reasons as to why. And I would imagine, but I do like the fact that, you stand by the work that you guys are doing in the community. And it's very uplifting. A lot why, it's really why I think we jive from the beginning, like I said, meeting with John and just understanding the principle and perspective of what our platform is.
Right.
We really want to do our best to be as uplifting and empowering, whether it be through the topics of education or, the Black businesses that we highlight, the gems that we find. And I think that's why it works so well. And I just love, to hear that from you guys, because and that's why I thought it was important for us to open up this season with you, because it was far too long before we actually got you on here. And that was really us being, new, trying to figure out what was going on. But I had to make sure that when we opened up this season that we had you guys on. I really loved the work.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
How do you guys decide? Because I'm listening to you, and and I know your integrity, I know your work, and that you stand by and you guys take your time. But how do you choose what articles you're going to write? How does that process work?
There are a series of questions that we have to ask ourselves and our staff to decide what's the impact of this story. How does it impact our readership? Should we write it? We don't have a large staff. We don't have the funding that some other publications have, even on the local level. So we need to look at things and prioritize what we can write with what we need to write. And sometimes there are just stories that come up that we know we need to cover. Like I can remember a specific instance this summer, and I won't get into details on what happened, but I got a text saying that there was something happening there was something happening in the county, and there were no reporters there, and it was something big that they felt like the story needed to be covered. So I got dressed and went out and wrote the story.
Okay. So people are able to contact you guys, or if they find something is going on, unjust, they can ask you guys to look into it. Do you guys do investigative journalism as well?
Absolutely. And as Lisa said, it's within the reason of what, and with Ron Marie's of what is best for our community. Because we know that how certain facts are going to be portrayed in the media. And one of the things we've been blessed with, as Lisa said, when you have a smaller staff, when you're beginning in the genesis stages, that you do have to go and talk with the people. And like I said, that's where we emphasize putting the boots on the ground and wherever we can go as much as possible. But we've gotten now to the point where, and thankful for those who have come to us recently. We did an interview with Candy King, who just recently won the Virginia second district delegates, and shout out there. And people are coming to us now and saying, hey, can you, the people are coming to us and say, hey, we need you, like Lisa said, to help cover this story. But it has to be within what is in our culture. And so when we do, there's times we have done investigations, and there is a lot of stories that we talked about it, and we said, no, this is left on the cutting room floor because it does not emphasize what we feel is best for our community. And so there are many times in which and there will be more investigations that we're doing in the coming year, but at the same time, we want to say, okay, does this fit? Is this the best for our community? Is this best for our people to listen to?
Okay.
Very good. We are. I know when we first talked, you asked me about, was I a journalist? I had no idea of being a journalist, but being a criminal justice major, you find that you have to get into certain details, and that I try to stick to the details here with what we talk about. Like you just said, try to really, is this something that's going to be positive or bring about something impactful to people who are listening? And, with that statement, though, impactful, I just want to ask both of you, if you could just take a second, how do you feel like the work that you're doing, like, how do you feel the impact is being felt in our community? Because I know how I feel about it, but I want to hear from you guys, your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd say that, a lot of the feedback we've gotten, all of it, for the most part, has been extremely positive. And, for instance, even if it's so much anything as for a press release, or if it's a small investigative story, one of the things we love to do, we've got a feature we come out this year. I'll give you a perfect example. It's called Sister to Sister. And the point is to uplift and empower the Black women in our community who have been silenced for far too long. And so all the feedback we get is so loving. It's like, oh, thank you. I wasn't sure about, we were able to do this because I didn't know so much my business was that important. We're talking about solopreneurs who are just getting started, and it's always kind of the same thing. Thank you for just helping to be a voice for us. Thank you for allowing us to speak on these things, because we would never think that this is important. It's like, if it matters to you, it matters to us. And so that is something we've given, and we have found ourselves just consistently becoming a reservoir of information and being able to channel out the facts and details for people who may have felt, well, I can't go to these people, I can't go to this news outlet because they're going to look down. I give you a perfect example of that. There was a situation, matter of fact, it was over the summer with the Stonewall Jackson, the name removal, and it became, Braxton, UNT Reed, high school, middle school, respectively. And I remember I was speaking for a reporter from their publication, and they told me that their publication told them, no, do not cover this. Do not go over there and cover this issue because our constituents will be upset. And it was very telling when you realize that there are publications who intentionally, I should say, try to stifle stories from getting out because they feel it's going to hurt a certain segment of the population. So one of the feedback we've gotten, it has been very encouraging, very positive. And that's why, like you were talking about earlier, Nisha, we have to be a publication of honesty and integrity, because we have to stand on that, because that's what's going to draw people, not agenda-based journalism, but fact-based journalism.
Right.
Wow. Man.
Right. And our news and our news, and to find out, because I feel that in this community, in the Black community, we lack that. We lack a sense of our news. So we kind of go as a whole to mainstream media, but we have to pick like CNN to give us news, or wait for a little snippet on a grander scale to see what is happening in the Black community, because we have nothing coming out except for you guys. I mean, it was a blessing when we first started, and he's like, hey, have you heard of Prince William Perspective? And I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, I'm going to be on there. So I started reading, and I'm like, why don't I know about this? You know what I mean? So it's like, we need that, but we need that, and we need people to understand that we need you guys so you can give us our news, because our news is very different. Our news is not going to be always what CNN says or what Fox News, or because they have agendas. Their agenda is not for us. Their agenda is for corporate America. So they have agendas in those. So it's very important work that you're doing, and we have to get the masses to get with that and inspire others to follow in you guys' footsteps, because we need Black news again. I remember when they silenced Roland Martin, and he was no longer able to be on mainstream anymore because he had a voice and he had a platform and he had his own thinking, and he wasn't able to be controlled. So he went away.
Right. Yeah. You said he wouldn't play ball. Right.
Yeah, he wasn't playing ball.
So, what would you say is one common myth about journalism that you guys would like to debunk?
Well, I would say that not everything is true just because it's reported by a reputable source. The New York Times is extremely guilty of using racist tactics to sell their papers and online subscriptions. There's bias in almost all news, regardless of its source, and most of the time that bias is against us, against people of color, against the Black community. So I think that's one myth that needs to be debunked, where people assume that just because they're reading it in the Washington Post or the New York Times, that it has to be true, that there's no agenda that those papers have.
That's interesting, because that is the thought, that if the paper printed it or if the news reported it, then it is so because the news said so. Well, that is very true, Langston. Thank you so much for that, because I think that is a big myth.
I absolutely point there, because what happened, and there's always been kind of this, and I go back to something that was really disappointing to myself Wednesday. And one person said, I think it was Mark Lamont Hill may have said it on Twitter, and we were watching the insurrection of the domestic terrorists take place at the Capitol. And I'm flipping over to BET and TV One, and I'm seeing reruns of Martin and Family Matters. I'm sitting here like, yo, wait, what's going on here, people? And that is what I'm talking about. That's why what Langston and I, we do what we do at the PW Perspective, is because it's almost just the perception. There's one myth I want to debunk here as well, is that, especially in entertainment, that Black people don't care about news. That Black people don't care about news unless it's celebrity gossip or it's something that is salacious that's happening in the church. It's the fact is that we, like you said, we grew up, some of us grew up in an era where we would watch, if you live in a local DC metropolitan area, you saw Jim Vance. If you saw someone, and I got a chance to meet him, and it was such an extraordinary experience to talk to somebody who said, with his big moving voice, like, we have a responsibility to tell the truth to our people. So if you saw the Bernard Shaws, if you live in New York, the Sue Simmons, and so many iconic
Sue Simmons, yeah.
When she grew up, that was one thing she said she wanted to be, Sue Simmons growing up. And, and people like that, who, when you watch them on television, that you felt inspired, like, wow, these are our people telling our stories. And so that's why today, more than ever before, shows like Two Mics Up and others, the PW Perspective and other Black journalists, we have a responsibility to reach out and tell those stories to our people, because as Langston said, you can't trust, I'm going to trust the same people that hurt me. It's like what the old saying, you don't go back to the people that hurt you. I'm not going to go to the New York Times for my information, or the Washington Post. I'm not going to go to my hometown, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, because I know what their agenda is, and it's not to encourage us. So that's where we do carry almost a burden, but it's also a responsibility that we have to be those truth tellers, because where else are you going to find it?
Where else are you going to find it? And that is the truth. What would you guys give to what advice would you give to a young up and coming journalist, like maybe someone who's going to listen to this show and really gravitate towards your style of journalism? What advice would you give them?
Well, as someone who, I'm only 21, so I guess what I would tell them is the philosophy I write by, which is pursue the truth and don't back down in the face of adversity. Not everyone wants to hear the truth, but it's not our job as journalists to tell them what they want to hear.
I'm just going to say
21, Langston?
Right. Before John,
he's got whistle twice as people over his age.
That's how I was going to say. Before you even go, John, like, where did you develop this? Like, where in your background, your DNA at such a young age to be saying something as profound as that? Like, where does that come from? Where did you discover this?
I think my mom just raised me right.
Oh, enough said then. Enough said. Right. Enough said then. I believe it right there.
Absolutely, yes. She's a wonderful woman. I would say to up-and-coming journalists, know the value of your voice. Know the value, know the power that you have. You know, I'm the son of a man who, my father, he was in SNCC. He was a junior Black Panther. And one of the things he will always tell me is, and this is from a man who was consistently beaten by cops fighting for our right to vote and our right to assemble. And he would say to me that there is power in your voice. Don't let everyone diminish that. And so for anyone who's coming up in this industry, you know, number one, you need to find your voice. And anyone that tries to muffle that voice, it's not worth it, because the money will come and go. The fame will come and go, but your legacy will remain forever. And there's a reason we talk about Ida B. Wells and Jim Vance's of the world, because they knew their value. You know, to a lesser extent, the Armstrong Williams, they knew their value. And we understand that for anyone who's coming up in this industry, when you find what that is, stick to it, remain in it, develop it, allow it to grow, because that is what's going to take you places that no one else can take you.
Mm-hmm. On that one, I gotta let the microphone breathe for a minute, because that has to marinate, because that was so real,
profound.
It was beyond profound. And man, John, you just messed my head up with that one, brother. that was real. But I do have to ask, you know, and I this was really something that I pondered in my head, because I knew we were going to have you gentlemen joining us. And obviously you guys are the consummate professionals in what you're doing. I'm more impressed really talking to the young man Langston. Like, I didn't realize he was that young, first of all.
Right.
So I'm blown on that. But being journalists, and this was something I really tried to think of outside the box. If you were, you know, in my shoes, Elisa's shoes, like, what's the one question that you would have asked, you know, yourselves that we didn't have the chance to ask you today?
Well, I would say a big question would be, who are our influences? And I know my own. I can't speak to John's, but
well, go right ahead. Please do. Go ahead.
For me, it would be Dr. Angela Davis, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and the late Congressman John Lewis, who I had the opportunity to meet.
Well, go ahead and expand. Give us a little bit. Don't hold back, brother. Go ahead. Give us a little bit more. You know, because people listening, they need to hear this, man. Like, give us a little more. Like, why or what was? Just pick one individual that really helped drive you and motivate you and inspire you to do what you're doing.
Well, I think what really drove me to all my community engagement was when I wrote to Congressman Lewis after the 2016 election, and he invited me to meet with him in Washington, D.C. And I had the opportunity to sit down in his office with him and have a conversation. And he told me to go out there and make some good trouble. And really, I think that's what the PW perspective is about. Not remaining silent, not letting the silence persist, but making good trouble and bringing good trouble to light that other people are making.
Wow, well said. Thank you for sharing that, Langston. John, same question for you.
One question I would ask is, where does journalism go from here? Because what happens in 2020, and I'll take it farther even more so, when we saw the election of former President Barack Obama, and you know, where it was a crazy, or I can dare say 1992, where we saw the explosion of Black, you know, elected officials, that there was, you know, that we started to see more people exercising that Black power movement that what we saw in the 1960s. I would say, where is journalism going? Now we see in 2020 what happened last year with the creation of Two Mics Up, the PW Perspective, and other local publications of people of color, that this is something that's come out of the box that's not going to be put back in. And regardless of what happens after Inauguration Day and going forward, we have a responsibility to keep this going and keep it expanding. We cannot just settle and say, oh, well, Trump's out of office. Now we can take a step back because, as David, you and I were talking about earlier, that's when issues happen. That's when trouble starts. That's where problems occur in the Black and brown communities. And so we need to remain vigilant. We need to continue to report on who our local officials are, what is happening in our police departments, and we need to be able to speak the truth to power, because it's going to keep happening as long as voices like ourselves just sit back and say, well, this person's out of the White House, we can take a step back. And that is one of the things I think was one of the biggest failures of the post-civil rights movement for a while, where there was just, okay, now we're moving into the middle class, we're enjoying our life, we didn't have nothing to march on the streets, we got voting rights, and see, that's when the Southern strategy started to implement itself. So what we got to do is we have to put our face to the button. It's like, a ninja, one of those ninjas, you got to put your hand down, got to keep pressing, got to keep cutting stuff up, right? And
that's right.
we have to do, because the second we start getting stagnant, that's where problems occur. And then we come back all over again in a year or so. This year in Virginia, what do we have? We have the governor, race, we got the lieutenant governor's race.
Yes.
And we cannot be silenced on this. So we have got to encourage and empower our people to get out and vote, know who their elected officials are, know what their issues are. And that's where responsibility of journalists like Langston and I, and with Two Mics Up, is to keep the people informed, is keep the wheel going, because somebody's going to listen to this podcast tonight and they're going to say to themselves, hey, I get a chance, I need to be able to speak my voice too. And that's what we all simply want to do. But we cannot be stagnant in our approach.
Man,
absolutely.
You two
totally
gentlemen,
agree.
These two gentlemen is on fire.
Totally.
I don't know what rock. If y'all are tuning in for the first time, you really need to play this back a couple of times, because these two gentlemen really gave us some really great insight and perspective, and really shared some knowledge and some gems with us today during this episode. Like I said, I can't say thank you enough. For spending some time out of your busy schedule with Lisa and I and our listeners today. Yes. Like I said, this is a great way to kick off the season. So before we go,
it is.
Right, it is. I mean, I'm sorry. This is the best way to kick off the season.
Hey, we got 27 Yankees, man. We were the Golden State Warriors, Stephen and Clay. We're all KD, we're all loaded here.
We loaded here, man.
Should be.
You're right. And before I go, I want to allow the both of you to, share any closing thoughts, comments, any information. I want to make sure that people here, especially in our community, one, if they haven't heard of you before, they need to know of you when they leave this episode. So please let them know where they can find you and anything else that either one of you have on. And, John, I'm going to go ahead and let you go ahead and start off first.
Well, first of all, thank you all so much, Damon and Alicia, for everyone listening to Mics Up. We want to just say thank you for what you've done and how you've continued to just be that voice. Continue to do the amazing things that you're doing. It is an honor to have wonderful people like Langston and the wonderful staff, Anissa, Lelita, and Alice, and even some of the other ones like Evelyn, who has moved on. And we're so thankful for all the contributors who have been a part of the vision, everyone in the community who has taken time. And let me just say this too, because I think sometimes there's this misconception that, it's pro-Black, anti-racist. It's just all like, no, we have white people on our staff as well. There are people who join in. It's not just allies, they're accomplices. So I want to make that perfectly clear, because I want to debunk some of those things, but we're thankful and we're humbled just by all the support we've received. And we want to just continue to be a voice in the community. And so that's what we're going to continue to do in the new year. We got some things that we're going to be doing, going more in depth, like investigations, and even in the process of doing our first documentary series. And so there are some things that we're really going to be hitting on that we want to just tie to the community, because there's so many stories to tell. We haven't even begun to tip the surface of what's been going on. So we want to thank you all so much for allowing us to be here today, and we'll just continue to be the voice of the silenced minorities.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you. I can't say it enough. Langston, please share your information or anything final comments you'd like to share with our listeners before we go today.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for having us on today. And the work that you're doing in our community is incredible and important. And it's empowering to know that the PW perspective is not alone in doing this work. And I'd also like to thank your viewers and just say that you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at PW Perspective. And if you need to contact us, we are pwperspective@gmail.com. Thank you.
Langston. I appreciate that. Lisa, my sister, any final thoughts or comments before
I
we
tell
go?
you what, I'm telling you, this was really a good episode. I really enjoyed myself. I learned a lot this evening, and we will always support you guys. You definitely are family here at Two Mics Up. When the documentary is ready and ready to be out, we would love to have you back on to get the word out about the documentary and explain it about what's going on with that or anything else you need us for. We are definitely here. We are a community, we are one, and we have to move as one. And I appreciate all the work that you guys put in to the Prince William perspective. Like I said, I am a fan. I do read and I do see the truth and the honesty in your work. So I appreciate what you do because you are a source. Even though I don't live in Prince William, you are a source to me and my news and what's important in my world. So I thank you guys for that.
Well said, sis. And listeners, look, I think I said it earlier. I really am blessed and honored to have been introduced to John Reid. I'm blessed to have been in his presence. I've seen his work. And I am just thankful that we are, in a way, an extension of what the Prince William perspective brings. I hope that we are bringing the same quality, the same education, the same empowering and impactful message to you all that are listening today. You can always follow Two Mics Up online at www.twomicsup.com. You can catch us on social media, Facebook, IG, and Twitter at Two Mics Up. And like we always do at this time, stay safe, stay blessed. Mics out.
Mics out.
At this time, we'd like to thank our executive producer in Cunningham and our executive marketing and branding team of A. Cunningham and D. Martin from 94 Media House for their contributions to today's podcast.